guests, ladies and gentlemen, researchers and guests from various countries. I hope you enjoyed your break, and we welcome you back to the third session of our conference under the title Yemen Challenges of War and Opportunities for Peace. In the third and final session of this conference, under the title Peace and National Reconciliation, we shall listen to two papers. Please welcome the moderator of our last session on stage, Mr. Enzo Curcio. He is joining us from Italy. He is a journalist, coordinator of FAO, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate.
Thank you so much. I'm Enzo Curcio. I'm from Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations. That is the agency, the main agency of United Nations that work for fighting hunger. And I would like to even give you some news. 2 days ago, our Director General, José Graziano da Silva, was called at the United Nations for a report to the member states about the situation of hunger. And the main part of his speech was dedicated to Yemen. Why Yemen crisis? Not only because it's the tragedy that we described before, but even because after, according to the UN, the 2018 UN report on hunger, after 10 years of United Nations policy to fight hunger, this year the hunger increase of 816,000 units. And UN put a lot of energy to fight hunger in 2030. A lot of efforts and a lot of investment of states and a lot of investments from citizens. That means, but part of this increasing was due to the Yemen crisis. And we highlight how there is not peace without food security, and there is not food security without peace. And if we want to achieve the 2030 goals of UN, we have to understand this connection. A peaceful world is not only prevent conflict or solve conflict, but a peaceful world is a paradigm that is connected directly with the preserve every life of human being on this planet. This is the most important issue, and the call to the states to fight to protect life is connected with fighting hunger and with making peace. I just wanted to introduce myself with this because this session is focused on peace and national reconciliation. I was so happy and amazed this morning about the thousands of questions. All of you are part of this issue. I'm very lucky I'm not part. I'm really emotional with you, but you are part of this tragedy. But together we are part of a solution, of the solution of this tragedy. And I think that the solution has to be started to preserve the unity of the society and the work that has been done until the first process of the Constitution, as several times even Tawakkol Karman highlighted and in her speech. So I would like to introduce now my colleague. First of all, Guillermo Giaratana is an Italian surname,
Italian
but
roots.
Yes, but is from South America, yeah, and from Argentina and French, and is Associate Research Fellow at IRIS, specializing in geopolitics of Latin America and the Middle East. But here there is France, not Argentina, but it's okay. You can clarify. And the other guest colleague is Radwan Zadiek, the future, and he will speak about the future of peace and national reconciliation in light of international experiences. That is very interesting to give new perspective to the peace process. And is a senior fellow at United States Institute for Peace, that is one of the most prestigious institutes for prevent and reconciliation conflict, and prevent conflict and reconciliation, and the executive director of the Syrian Center for Political and Strategic Studies in Washington, D.C. I will give the floor to Guillermo for...
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for being here, and thank you for the invitation as well. The existence of multiple layers of overlapping violent dynamics make the resolution of the conflict in Yemen extremely deadly and complex. The persistence of these dynamics and the delays in reaching a peace agreement jeopardize the very existence of the state of Yemen. International organizations helping local communities to cope with this situation face serious constraints. What is the role of and what are the challenges of international organizations in a shattered country? Will they make a real difference to local populations in the long run? What about the limits of their actions? Are there any possible linkage with local organized civil society? Let's explore these questions. I would like to challenge a little bit the role of the international organizations there. But before that, let me first introduce briefly a view of the conflict, focus on the complexity, a little bit, yeah? Because we talk a lot in the morning. Today, the conflict in Yemen is increasingly far from being a simple two-sided confrontation. There are several layers of overlapping conflictual dynamics in the country, particularly in the south. The first layer, as you know very well, it's most known, the conflict between the Saudi-led coalition supporting the international recognized government of Yemen and the Houthis and Houthis forces. This is not a single open conflict, but a theater where several other confrontations are taking place. This layer frames the war, but it's not the entire war. A second layer, the existence of two different agendas held by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, with focus on two different geographical areas of interest. There are worrying signs showing that the two biggest states in the coalition are not only operating a joint front against the Houthis, but also seeking to expand their political and economic interests in Yemen, which are much greater than the immediate tactical goals of defeating the Houthis. Several facts confirm this statement. A third stratum, the Southern question, and the fracture between President Hadi, the Southern Transition Council, and Hadi's cabinet, especially with the security belt as a branch, as the security branch of the Southern Transitional Council. Al-Iraq, the Southern movement, as you know very well, even better than me, has called for a referendum last year to split from the North. The issue was added to the agenda of the Transitional Council. So the question of unity or independence of the South is and will be a critical destabilizing factor. Honestly, this could be a second chapter of the war. Another layer, it was mentioned as well, the war on terror carried out by United States military forces using armed drones targeting extremist radicals. The use of remote control, armed, unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, poses an unprecedented real threat to international organizations in the south and the southwest, as well as to local communities as well. It results in a number of civilian deaths as collateral damage. The use of armed drones in combat operations marks a terrifying new departure in warfare, which goes far beyond the war in Yemen. This entails ethical question as well, of course. Then another layer of complexity, the presence of radical groups in the south particularly, which is often the cause of violent armed attacks, and the religious tensions, confrontation tensions, Shia versus Sunnis, Sunnis inside the Sunnis, Wahhabism versus Muslim Brotherhood, more conflictual layers. So, and the last but not least, the non-Gulf state asserting their own interests in Yemeni territory, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Iran. With scant or even no direct involvement in the daily planning and execution of military operations, nonetheless, they provide direct support to the coalition by providing material capabilities and endorsing the coalition's agenda. The action of the coalition are based on the explicit or tacit consent of those major international players. The billionaire arms, as was said before, trade deals made with Saudi Arabia and United Emirates by US, UK, and France in the past will prevail, is prevailing over the interests of Yemeni population, which is peace and the alleviation of the suffering. I wanted just to show quickly these overlapping layers of the conflicts to see the complexity of this. So we can say that the initial two-sided war has turned into several wars in a country that is dramatically descending into chaos. A patchy map of multiple wars is emerging, where enemies become temporary allies to fight a third enemy. Such dynamic is very territorial and takes a different form in each governorate. In the south, the complexity even worse because the existence, as I say, of different actors with power to exert hard violence. The security belt against the unity force, against the President Hadi's forces, Emiratis fighting radical groups, intermittent alliance, and the external operation with drones from US. So, more volatile, unpredictable. Conversely, in the north, the conflict is presenting more like traditional wars with two well-defined enemies. Nevertheless, the casualties are much higher, especially for civilians. Why? Because of the indiscriminate use of airstrike targeting non-military facilities. I know that you know very well that better than me. That I wanted just to put this because in this context is where international organization will operate. Just to close these first parts, the very likely scenarios ahead are disturbing. Firstly, a Syria-like situation, except for the existence of a strong state apparatus, where powerful external state actors behave and make deals as if they held sovereignty. Second scenario, a situation moving rapidly towards a Libya-like atomized failed state, where local struggles with powerful firepower can persist for a long time. Both scenarios are deadly for an already depleted population and put the existence of Yemen as a state at risk. Within this environment, international organizations have been playing an irreplaceable role in supporting population. Without them, the Yemeni population would have been annihilated after more than 3 years of war and external embargoes. We must acknowledge that in spite of the number, the programs executed are not enough to cover the current needs. Important to know that this international organization emerged from civil society, which reflect the involvement of the civil society in international affairs, beyond the states. It's true that it's a phenomenon that happened more in the western part of the world, but slowly we see growing in the eastern part as well. International organizations are ruled by their own specific mandates, values, and specific operational culture. So, the diverse nature of international organization is a fact. Emergency, humanitarian, peace building, development, academic, human rights, UN agencies, all these organizations, just to introduce a simple categorization, yeah? A few words regarding humanitarian organizations, which are key at this moment. To operate in open conflict, they maintain the principle of humanity, independence, impartiality, and neutrality, known as the humanitarian principle. In Yemen, the armed conflict poses the most significant challenge for humanitarian organization, obtaining, affirming, sustaining the humanitarian space. What is that? Humanitarian space. What is that? This means the symbolic and actual space where humanitarian activities can take place. It implies specifically access. Access for humanitarian teams to population at risk, and access to healthcare and relief services for these populations, in double sense. Free dialogue with the populations, freedom of movement where populations in danger are located, free evaluation of needs and the delivery of the aid. So, as I say, the Yemeni conflict has been particularly challenging with regard to the humanitarian space. Serious constraints of access and security incidents have critically limited the action of humanitarians and caused severe damage to them. These constraints have taken multiple forms: delays or refusal of grant visa for international staff, restriction moving in the country, restriction to leave the country for local staff, deliberate movement restriction inside Yemen, delays on imports and distribution of the humanitarian goods, detention of staff, open threats, kidnapping of staff, targeted assassination, diversion of aircraft, prohibition of flying over the Yemeni airspace and the use of ports. But the worst, the direct airstrikes on healthcare facilities and hospitals in spite of their visible identification. The incidents faced by humanitarians do not differ much from those suffered by Yemeni communities. Airstrikes on schools, social gatherings, buses, markets, and mosques have caused thousands of civilian casualties. These incidents can be taken as war crimes. All the actors involved in the conflict are responsible for breaching the international humanitarian law with no distinction. However, the winner of this violation race is Saudi Arabia for the inconceivable number of civilian deaths because the airstrikes, as we mentioned before. The warring party must definitely be held accountable for their violation of the humanitarian law, the human rights law, and the rules of engagement in the war. This violation must stop because the war has rules. The barbarity must allow space for humanity. On this subject, the United Nations and the states' diplomacy should play their role. But this is the present. Let's look a little bit to the future. Let's wish a little bit. Let's look to the future. The evolution of the life of any country goes through different phases, normally. Now, from conflict to post-conflicts, the process goes through specific stages. No? Peacemaking, peacekeeping, peace building. Simplify, huh? The peace agreement is the turning point that could change the course of the current situation. The peace agreement. Once a peace agreement is achieved, the social, security, and political dynamic change significantly in a positive sense. Such a profound change in the environment should produce adjustments in the practices and operational approaches of the international organization. So, a key question on the table: how can organizations make the best contribution to fulfill the immediate needs of people and simultaneously affirm the post-conflict agenda? This question is fundamental in order to synchronize, reinforce the political process engaged and the specific efforts of the international organizations. Of course, international organizations with expertise in conflict resolution and peace building are called on to contribute to interaction with political, security actors and tribal leaders. The existing peace-building mechanism within the United Nations will continue their engagement at the highest level, but at lower regional levels, demands for this specific know-how will also be greatly needed. Some institutions will focus more on bridging the fractured lines, religious, ethnic, political, territorial, strengthening a fluent and meaningful exchange between political, military, social, and tribal representatives at all the three levels, the very local one, governorate, and national, by creating spaces and forums in the spirit of a shared national destiny. Other organizations should put the effort into empowering local communities to address the immediate needs or executing programs directly. I would like to mention an often neglected role in post-conflict transition is the role offered by institutions supporting art and sport. Artists and athletes, their role must be considered vital during this phase. Music, you listened at the beginning here, the lovely music, art, poetry, painting, and any other local expression of arts, because art reaches areas beyond the immediate physical needs or political processes. They touch feelings, emotions. Given the trauma experienced by children, young women, men, fathers, and mothers, and the deeply fragmented social fabrics, considerable efforts need to be directed to this field. The existence of multiple conflicting allegiances in the religion and political and tribal spheres in the country mean art could work well in providing emotional spaces where Yemenis can rebuild their self-esteem, reencounter each other, and enjoy constructive emotional experiences together that overcome pain and division. A similar approach could be made with sports. The role of international humanitarian organizations will, of course, continue to be fundamental to improve the living condition. However, a smart approach would adjust activities and programs to include the goal of reinforcing the structural aspect of each domain of action: health, food security, water, shelter, protection. This in order to create structural conditions for long-term recovery and peace in Yemen. In other words, the organization should accept that they must converge with the political process of reaffirming the condition for peace. All this work cannot be exclusively undertaken by foreign actors. Local people must own the entire process in all its dimensions and become the main actors in the transformation of their reality. The number and strength of local organizations must become an expression of a healthy social fabric and democratic life in Yemen. Peace building is not only about strengthening the state governance bodies, the security apparatus, the justice system, and the political process, or eliminating violence. It is also about empowering civil society as an active player in the reconstruction of the country. Unfortunately, current analyses show that organizations from the global south suffer from structurally limited access to funds and technical capabilities for large volume operations. Paradoxically, Southern organizations remain active for a long time in spite of meager budgets, simply because they are at home and have learned to do a lot with very little. Bridging that gap will result in a positive impact for all the parties, first population, then local organization, and as well for the success of the program of international organization. Temporary presence is an intrinsic feature of international organization. They should include in their operational goals the transfer of expertise and means to local organization whose permanent character will help to attain goals beyond the presence of the international organization. If this transfer is made within a framework of emancipation and autonomization, local organization will evolve as a lasting force of change within the Yemeni civil society. The hope is that international NGOs could understand and integrate this emerging challenge fully into their approach. Because of this much-needed linkage between international and local organization, both must find ways from early stage to create, strengthen, and sustain this relay mechanism. One last idea from my side. One powerful and essential actor has not yet been mentioned. Universities. This strategic actor in any country is often left to one side when conflict or political unrest occur. Both public and private universities should involve in the post-conflict phase in Yemen, not only to provide physical space for training sessions, but also to use their educational resources, academic knowledge, and personnel to speed up the process of reconciliation, simultaneously with their mission of higher education. Although few in number and greatly affected by the war, universities and high schools should become active facilitators of spaces for debates at the heart of the cities and in the rural areas. In conclusion, the process of recovery and peace building requires the participation of all sorts of organizations, each contributing with their expertise, know-how, resources, following their institutional mandate, but also fostering and converging on the agreed national roadmap for recovery. This major challenge implies the creation of convergence constructive force. The moral obligation of caring extends to the efforts and to ensure peace beyond the activities planned by each organization, reinforcing the local actors. But just to finish, before all this, please sign a peace agreement. Give a chance to the peace.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Guillermo. And thank you for highlighting the true word that we use daily in United Nations, sustainable peace. Sustainable peace means that we need civil society. We need civil society. We need more international humanitarian organizations' actions, because we need a bridge between civil society and politics. The politics at the international level doing their job, at the national level they starting new process and new actions for the reconciliation. But the main actor for a sustainable peace are the people, are the humanitarian organization, are the civil society on the ground. As even the civil society in Yemen asked, and the local organization asked to be free, to have a new government, to have a new constitution at the beginning. The Spring Revolution was with those peaceful requests, but very clearly by civil society. So we can have a sustainable peace only if we involve civil society in this process. But in the meantime, I would like even to highlight another thing about the action of the international humanitarian organization in the field in Yemen. It's very important because I talked during your speech, I'm Italian. One of the main Italian organizations that work in Yemen is called Emergency, no? Yeah. And they build hospitals and Emergency, for example, thanks to Emergency, now we build rules on the control of the selling bombs to Saudi Arabia. Because, you know, almost all of the bombs on Yemen are from Italy, are made in Italy, that they are sold to Saudi Arabia and they bomb our people. So, thanks to the work in the field of international organization, we can push the government to change politics. For this, to me, is really strategical, the role, not only in the field, but even in the countries of origin of those organizations. You are double heroes on this way, and you can play a double role in the reconciliation process. Thank you. And I would like to hear from Redwan Ziadeh what kind of perspective of in the reconciliation process we have.
I would like to thank the moderator, and I would like to thank Ms. Tawakkol that I was honored to have a dinner in her house in 2014, just 2 months before the Houthis took control over the capital city of Sana'a. My relation with Yemen is very old, and I believe one of the most important poets is Al-Barduni, who influenced me, and I believe he is the Mutanabbi of the modern age. He said in 1970, "What can I say about Sana'a, my father? It has some diseases, although of its beauty." So that was in 1970. What could he say today? I will focus on in my paper about how can we re-establish the basis of the new legitimacy in Yemen based on the experience of transitional justice in the world. In February 2011, a popular revolution erupted against the regime of Ali Abdullah Saleh that lasted for 33 years as part of the wave of Arab Spring that started in Tunisia in December 2010. The Yemeni revolution was an inspiring revolution, not only for Yemenis, but for all Arabs. Despite the tribal factor in the political life in Yemen, it became marginal under the force of the youth revolt in the streets for the change. The other factor that inspired Arabs was the widespread of weapons in the Yemeni community, but it didn't prevent the Yemeni revolution to be characterized as a peaceful revolution that wants to make a change in the political regime that bring back the right to Yemenis to select their president and to select the political system they want. In November 2011, the international pressures, especially the Gulf pressure, represented in the GCC, where they had a lot of influence over Ali Abdullah Saleh, the former president. This pressure managed to sign the initiative of the GCC, and by this initiative or this agreement, Ali Abdullah Saleh was given immunity, and the powers of the president were granted to Vice President Hadi, who was considered a temporary or provisional president, and they started with the outputs of the national conference, the National Dialogue Conference. The National Conference lasted for 9 months with different parties, and there was a lot of arguments and debates with the different parties of their different backgrounds, ideologies. But at the end of the day, it was able to reach the comprehensive national document in 2014. This comprehensive national document or charter was an extraordinary achievement in all of the Arab world that included all parties in Yemen. Of course, this comprehensiveness and the dialogue, we didn't see it either in Lebanon or in any other place, not even in Tunisia. Several new community powers participated that didn't have any role in the past, like Ansarullah group, the Houthis, the Salafists, and the South movement, and the young people. And then the questions start to arise how the mechanism of implementing these outposts will be enforced on the ground, including transitional justice. The recommendations at the end were to establish a law for transitional justice and national reconciliation, and to create a commission for transitional justice, and to do institutional reform to prevent further human rights violations, and reveal the fates of forcibly disappeared persons, and to reconsider the taking office in the high ranking and holding these positions accountable. But in 2014, the conflict increased between the Houthis and the pro-government and other groups because of the sharing of power and the constitutional project. And 2014, in December, the Houthi and the pro-Saleh militias took control over Sana'a and other parts of the country and dominated that. In March 2015, Saudi Arabia created a coalition with other states to start a military operation upon the request of Hadi. Britain and USA supported, and other states supported the coalition, and they conducted airstrikes that caused civilian casualties. At the time, all the recommendations of the National Dialogue Conference were up in the air, and we have seen a lot of atrocities conducted by Saudi Arabia against civilians. In October 2016, there was a condolences tent that for civilians that was targeted by the Air Force and killed more than 137, and the coalition imposed embargo on seaports that led at the end to limit all the necessary imports to the country. In 2017, the coalition closed Sana'a airport, and it is still closed in the face of trade trips. Since March 2017, the UN Coordination Office considered that Yemen is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, and out of 29 million people, 12 million people needed relief, including 11.3 million people who are in urgent need for that, and the needs are on all levels, including health, food, sanitation, water, housing, and protection. We can say that with the control of Houthis completely over Sana'a and the beginning of the coalition operations in Yemen, Yemen got into a non-international armed conflict, and in this context, Yemen got into a new context of transitional justice that doesn't include local actors alone, but also international and regional actors as well. That's why we need to focus now on putting an end on the futile war and go back to the recommendations of the National Conference, and to start with establishing a Transitional Justice Commission focusing on accountability on the crimes perpetrated against Yemeni civilians since 2011. The question now is, why Yemen failed, and of course other Arab countries failed in political transition from dictatorships or military regimes into democratic regimes. On the contrary, these countries fell into civil wars that nobody can expect how they will end, or the ramifications of that war. Will Yemen become a failed state for a long time, because of the humanitarian need and the spread of chaos and the complete absence of state institutions, I believe there are several reasons that explain this shift, despite the improved political culture that was reflected in the outputs of the National Dialogue Conference, and despite the political culture that was reflected amongst the young people who didn't use weapons during the Yemeni revolution. I believe the reasons of the failure is not because of the peculiarity of the Yemeni experience, but they are rather because of the failure of the aspects of the of Arab states, especially in comparison with Europe and other regions. I believe there are 5 factors that played main role in what is called the failure of the democratic transition in Yemen. First, the old regime didn't support the new regime to be born. As we say in the studies of all the democratic transitions, the old regime has to support the new regime to emerge. On the contrary, the remnants of the old regime played a major role in preventing transition and failing it, even that it reached creating militias, non-state militias like the Houthis, and a lot of speakers talked about the role of Ali Abdullah Saleh in supporting Houthis as his alliances in order to fail the democratic transition. Here we have a very important comparison with Eastern Europe, where the Round Table played a major role in the dialogue between the different political actors for the democratic transition. Second factor was the role of the army in the transition. The more professional the army, the more facilitating a role it can take in democratic transition. This is the lesson of democratic transition in Latin America after long years of military dictatorships. The Yemeni army wasn't as professional as the army in Tunisia, but it wasn't in the level of the army in Syria or in Egypt. What happened is that the army in Yemen was divided almost half. Half of it was on the side of the Yemeni revolution, and half of it maintained its affiliation or belonging to Ali Abdullah Saleh. The third factor is the level of the middle class and its role. Because of the economic condition in Yemen, this played an important role in the collapse of the outputs of the national dialogue, because there was no social holder for implementing these recommendations. So the larger the middle class is, the easier the democratic transition. And I believe the Tunisian experience is evident to that. The fourth factor is the role of the international factor and international influence. The Arab Spring showed that democracy is not on the agenda of the international states for the region, on top of which the United States. That doesn't mean that the international community are against democratic transition in the region, but they don't encourage it enough with the resources or the political influence. Unlike the role of the United States, for example, in pushing for democratization in Eastern Europe, and in a very well-known study, the United States spent $9 compared to $1 for the democratization in Eastern Europe in comparison with the states of the Arab world. The fifth factor, which is important in my opinion, is the complete absence of regional organizations that support democratization. The European Union played a major role in putting the principles and conditions for Eastern Europe to join the European Union, unlike the Arab League that became an autocratic organization that is useless. The lack of regional institutions that play or foster the democratic transition, as happened with the European Union with the case of Eastern Europe, played a major role in the failure of the democratic transition in the Arab region. So each country of the Arab Spring was left alone to take its own course. Maybe Tunisia was different because it had different factors, where are other countries like Libya, Egypt, Yemen, and Syria were left alone based on the political elites whose democratic culture is in the minimum level. And this is harder with the hesitation of the international community to support the democratic experience in Yemen. That's why the transition in Yemen became an armed conflict and maybe a civil war. The paradox is that even in long war in other areas didn't stop the democratic course any day, which means Arab states didn't only fail in the democratic transition after the revolutions of the Arab Spring, and now they also failed in managing the outputs of the civil war, which means that even the civil war that took place in Sri Lanka, for example, for over 26 years, from 1983 until 2009, between the Tamil Tigers and the central government in Colombo, which is from the Congolian race, didn't stop the elections in Colombo. On the contrary, every 4 years elections took place, and voters decided the way the government should deal with the rebels. They chose the party that represent the best way to end the war, which varied from war to political competition, and the same applies to Colombia, where it witnessed the longest civil war. But elections didn't stop any day, and the centralized government didn't become a totalitarian government that allows the president to remain in position forever. Elections were always taking place on the basis of the direction that the government must take in dealing with the rebels. I believe I'm giving this example is very clear in comparison with what's happened in Syria, or what is happening in Syria and in Egypt, which means that the president is the one who deals or decides how to deal with the terrorists that they call terrorists, without having any role for the people to do that. So the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, who ended the war in 2009 by the might or the force of weapons, he lost the elections because of corruption and appointing his relatives in positions. So we can say that Arabs failed in managing the democratic transition after the Arab Spring, and it seems that they have double failure in managing the civil wars, and it seems that the only solution now is the continuation of the military elites in ruling, although this is at the cost of the dreams of the young people. That's why it seems that transitional justice today is a necessity not only for Yemen, but for all Arab countries. It's not a Western product, but in a way or another, it could be an alternative or an idea for re-establishing the legitimacy of the state on a new basis or a new foundations. The notion of transitional justice that can be recognized through a number of concepts like the social reconstruction, reconciliation, the commissions of truth, reparations, restoring public institutions, and others. But with the political transition and after civil wars that communities undergo, we find that the governments and civil society organizations have a very heavy heritage on in terms of human rights violations, so they deal with the past violations in order to reach justice and the truth, and to include civil societies in these processes. So it seems that going back to the recommendations of establishing the Commission of Transitional Justice, which was one of the recommendations of the National Dialogue Conference, is the only exit for the current Yemeni crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this perspective.